Thanks everyone for joining us today. We've been on quite a journey with this Green Shoot series so far. We started 2 months ago when the global impact of COVID was just starting to be felt. And our topics each week have been crowdsourced from the audience, starting with addressing immediate funding and cash flow challenges for startups, through to the responses from the public and private sectors, and through to the segments that we're likely to see the most growth in post-COVID-19, such as cybersecurity and regulatory technology, RegTech. We've heard from our audience that there's an increasing interest in understanding how other markets are starting to respond to the current situation and the opportunity areas that are opening up for partnerships. So this week, we're honoured to be joined by ambassadors and high commissioners to Singapore that represent 4 leading fintech hubs around the world: India, UK, Denmark, and Sweden. These panelists will share unique insights into the way that governments are responding to COVID-19 individually, but also how they're working together to stimulate the economy and drive forward global recovery. In Europe this week, you'll have seen that business travel is starting to open up again, but it's clear that on a global level, the low-touch economy is here to stay, and cross-border business, relationships, and trade will have to move to a more digital environment to adapt to the new normal. This is a record-breaking session for us at Green Shoots. We have over 700 people registered from 34 countries, and 70% of our audience is from the ASEAN region. So let's dive straight into the cross-border opportunities ahead. And I'll hand over straight to my co-host Pat to introduce us to our illustrious speakers.
Thank you, Becca, and welcome to everyone that's joining in today. So I'd like to start by introducing our very first speaker, Dorte, who is the Ambassador of Denmark to Singapore and Brunei. She holds the position of Chairman of the Danish Trade Council in Southeast Asia, and in 2013 was awarded the Order of Dannebrog. Is that the right way to pronounce it, Dorte?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, well, it doesn't sound too promising, but it's a Danish knighthood, so congratulations on that one. And so thank you for joining us, Dorte.
Thank you.
So just a quick question for you. So as Denmark begins to open up post-lockdown with business travel resuming, can you share a short overview on the current state of the economy, please?
Sure, thanks very much. I've been looking forward to this session with so many on board. And I think the situation in Denmark is now coming into to firm reopening territory. Since mid-April, we've been opening up gradually and in a phased manner. Our kids are back in school, many people are back at work. And as you say, from this week, business travel is now being opened up again. But the world around us has changed significantly and no country can work in a vacuum. So it doesn't really matter if Denmark is opening up, if the rest of the world or many parts of it are still in a standstill. So focus is very much on relief packages and support at this stage. I think no country can yet claim victory over COVID-19, but so far the rate of reproduction, which is the rate at which the virus spreads from one person to others, has seemed to decrease, to lower since we started opening up. And with our also much improved testing capacity, we are cautiously optimistic that we have insights, that we have data, and we're not just blindly opening up to a new wave of infections. So we hope that we can keep this going. But now, what has the COVID-19 situation meant for business? Well, like everywhere in the world, the slowdown has impacted Danish businesses tremendously. But quite generous support packages and measures aimed at keeping staff occupied will hopefully allow a quicker bounce back and prevent severe and long-term structural damage to our economy. And I'd like to add that the support packages in Denmark are not just for Danes, they're also available for foreign-owned companies in Denmark and for staff of any nationality that are working in Denmark. Nevertheless, despite all this support, we do see a negative impact of the crisis unfolding, and the financial services sector and fintech businesses have reported quite a lot of reduced access to capital and less commercial activity throughout the crisis. Some have had to scale back and let staff go, despite the relief measures. But there is also good news, and let me just very quickly touch on that before I pass the floor on. Because in the past month, several fintech companies in Denmark have announced new funding rounds. For instance, Nordic Gateway API, an open banking platform, they have recently raised 4.6 million euro this month and are expanding to become a pan-European platform. Another example is Circle Bank, a fully digital bank founded in Denmark, which has just announced plans to employ a further 100 people this year. So clearly there are businesses who are doing well. And I think interestingly, this COVID-19 crisis has shown us just what makes the fintech industry such an interesting sector to watch. The ability to quickly solve problems through technology at scale. We have seen, for instance, an example in Denmark of the Danish fintech unicorn Tradeshift. They're working now together with the Danish Export Credit Agency to try and solve the problem of opening up liquidity without just relying on government cash. Basically, they're trying to solve the problem of this death spiral that happens when companies all defer payments in a value chain. So together with the Export Credit Agency, they are offering up an immediate access to export credit that allows companies to pay their suppliers and without worrying about themselves becoming in financial problems. So this is one good example, I think, of how fintech helps us solve the problems that we face currently. So with that, I think I will hand over.
Thank you, Dorte, for that insightful opening. Our next speaker, Kara, is the British High Commissioner to Singapore. Having previously served stints at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and also the British Embassy in Paris, she's also been awarded with the CVO, the Commander of the Victoria Order, by the Queen. Thank you very much for joining us, Kara.
Thank you so much for having us. It's great to be on a panel with such excellent colleagues. And I think as this session goes through, I hope to learn as much from the attendees and the questions they ask and the points that they make as I can impart about what's happening in the UK. So the question you asked us at the top was to just give a bit of an overview of what's happening within our economies. As in Denmark, the UK, which has been through a period of real lockdown, is slowly coming out of lockdown with more and more people coming back to work and more sectors reopening safely. I think in terms of impact on the economy, of course, all of us are feeling an impact on our economy. The numbers of imports and exports coming in and out of the UK has fallen. But there are some areas of real continuing interest and resilience, including things like IT support, manufacture of pharmaceuticals, the obvious thing that you think are particularly connected to the way we need to work within the crisis. And I think as regards our tech sector, that is proving to be one of the most resilient sectors that we have. On some metrics, for example, the government is providing a lot of support for furloughed workers to try and make sure that they don't entirely come out of employment and that we can return back to productivity as quickly as possible. The tech sector in the UK is seeing one of the lowest number take-ups of that furlough support across any of the sector because people are remaining in employment. For governments, it's a really challenging moment because we have to both try and think about how we can support companies in the short term, as well as really being able to accompany the private sector as it adjusts into the medium and long term. So thinking through the kind of things, and I think there's going to be future questions around the kind of support that we're putting in place to make sure that really good companies with good business ideas can continue to not only survive but also thrive during this period. As Dorte said, you know, none of us are going to be able to do this on its own. There's a question on the chat here about whether or not we're going to go into a period where we see a lot more kind of nationalism and disruption of international supply chains. And I think that's that is something that we are really committed to make sure doesn't happen. I don't think it's in anybody's long-term interest to enable a chopping up of supply chains. We need to be working as much as possible to keep trade as open as we possibly can. That's definitely part of the agenda between the UK and Singapore, and other countries that are represented here have also been signing up to international statements around the importance of making sure that we don't retreat into some kind of comfortable protectionism. I think within government, we've been really amazed by the ingenuity and agility of this sector, fintech in particular. Innovate Finance, which is our UK fintech body, are publishing on a weekly basis new opportunities and new products to show how the sector is responding to underpin a kind of touch-free operation. and to underpin growth and continuing activity right across the board. The kind of things that we're looking at, and I can go into detail a bit later, are around how do we support innovation. We have put a significant amount of public funding into support innovative companies. We have got a future fund where we are giving government backing to match private sector funding to allow privately owned companies which are really viable to not only survive but grow during this period. And we've also got significant funding around research and development. I'm going to stop there because I think we're really conscious that there is an awful lot of stuff that we need to get through. So I'm happy to hand over to a colleague.
Thank you, Cara. And we'll definitely be delving into the cross-border partnerships element later on in the session. And it's great to hear that the resilience of the tech sector, and hopefully we're beginning to see that across large parts of the world as well. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Nick, who is the ambassador of Sweden to Singapore. He has held a number of senior posts in the UN and also worked at Goldman Sachs in London and New York, I believe in the early 2000s. So he has some interesting insight to share from a financial services perspective as well. So thank you for joining us, Niclas.
Thank you very much. Actually, already now I picked up some interesting things from the previous speakers. I just listened to DPM Heng's budget speech in the parliament, and it was very striking ahead of this conversation, the enormous focus on digitalization and preparing the population for the future. That's part of the rescue package. I would say that for the Swedish economy, as everyone else, I think the Minister for Finance said that we are facing a drop of 7% of GDP next year. You may have read that Sweden sort of stands out. It's not the case that we haven't taken strong measures against COVID, but the lockdown has been partial. So shops, restaurants, workplaces, and schools up to high school have remained open. And so the question is, does that mean then that Sweden has not been hit by COVID in the economic sense to the same extent as others? But I'm afraid that's not the case. We are one of the most externally dependent economies in the world, just like Singapore. And of course, all the external demand has shrunk. So even though there are certain parts of the economy that, of course, will be okay, the general drop has been significant, and it's hitting everyone, including startups. There have been a number of government packages. Recently, I think a $4 billion program to support companies, and the central bank, the sort of equivalent in this sense of the MAS, has, I think, pledged 60 billion in terms of loan guarantees projects. I want to say, though, one thing about our ecosystem that I think is relevant. Of course, the government, I know that there's calls from the Swedish startup sector for the government to do, I think, what I just heard Singapore do, which is a dedicated package to startups. Some entrepreneurs have been calling for that publicly, although I saw a couple of other startup representatives saying that, no, maybe that's not the right way to go, because then you might be promoting business models that were not, fit to survive anyway. So there is some debate, but it's clear that it's going to hit everyone. I think what I want to say is about our ecosystem. Every ecosystem is unique, and the Swedish Fintech and the Swedish tech ecosystem is different in our way. I'm sure you've heard Stockholm referred to as the unicorn factory. It was not a coincidence that Skype and Spotify, Klarna, Mojang came, and in the fintech sector, iZettle and Klarna came out of Sweden. There was a long experience going back to, we talked about I worked in the finance sector in New York and London back in the late 1990s. And already then, although you can say there were a couple of bubbles that burst along the way, there was a lot of experience, a lot of financiers. And I think the reason that Sweden is such a tech heavy and Stockholm such a tech capital is largely to do with the fact that you have an intermingling of private sector financing, government support for sure, but also innovation and research. There are a lot of high quality research institutions that also spawn a lot of these companies. And Sweden is one of the most MNC heavy countries in the world per capita. Cara is here, so we have AstraZeneca in common, but there's ABB, Ericsson, Scania, Volvo, and so on. This industrial core together with, let's say, Ericsson on the tech side, that I think has been extremely valuable for our ecosystem. So why do I mention all this? Well, I think that the key out of this crisis is to restart smart, not just rely on government funding. We need to come out greener than we were, more digital than we were, and using new technologies to a greater extent than we were before. And Sweden is probably the most cashless society in the world, and certainly one of the most digitized. And I think that is an advantage that gives me confidence that our fintech sector and our tech sector in general will be able to be resilient and get through it. We're also entering the time of 5G, especially Sweden being the home of Ericsson. We're conscious of this. And I think that it's an opportunity, and I think the European Union, in fact, put forward a big plan as well, where we're coming out of COVID, but we're also using that as an opportunity to tackle other challenges like climate change, for example. So those are just some of my conclusions, and just the final word is to leapfrog, let's say, in terms of fintech, take the final molds, breaking down, let's say, mortgages or pensions, getting digital in the places that have so far essentially been outside the digital space. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Nick. Unfortunately, we're not talking on Skype today, but exactly the reason why we've chosen these tech hubs around the world to share insights on. So finally, we have Jared, the High Commissioner of India to Singapore, a career diplomat who's also served as the Joint Secretary to the Prime Minister's Office, both for PM Singh and also for PM Modi. And thank you for joining us, Jared.
Well, thank you. Again, great pleasure to be here. Again, greetings to my diplomatic colleagues. We haven't met for a long time, so it's good to see them. Great to see that they're all in good shape. Also, delighted to see that there's a lot of convergence of views in the way things are happening and the way we would like to see things evolve from now onwards. I'd like to just make 4 basic points. One, of course, is that we're a country of 1.3 billion people, and we began to take some early measures starting mid-January once it became evident that there was a new virus coming out. And we went into a complete lockdown in 24th of March, which was the world's largest and probably the biggest lockdown, 1.3 billion people in complete shutdown conditions. It had its challenges, but we are just beginning to come out of it. As some of you might know, that we've just resumed air services within the country. Trains are also begun to move. Industry, in some senses, has begun to operate. Offices are back in business. Of course, all social and safe distancing measures and other precautions are being taken. But it's going to be a slow, measured approach, taking into account the impact it has on the spread of infection and our ability to respond to them. We are simultaneously mounting a repatriation exercise that might involve repatriating more than 300,000 and more people from different parts of the world into India and looking after them as well. But in the meantime, we've also taken a series of steps regarding the economy. Of course, as everywhere else in the world, we expect a serious impact on the economy. But as the IMF projections show, that is likely to be among the better performing or the least affected economies as a result of COVID-19. We have introduced a series of measures that cumulatively account to about 10% of the GDP, or $265 billion, which includes several measures. It includes immediate relief for the poor, the migrant workers, the farmers. It includes measures for agriculture and the small and medium scale sector. As you know, India's small and medium scale sector has about 60 million units, and that's a large number. The trade has about 70 million members alone. And we've taken measures in terms of taxation, in injecting liquidity into the economy and into very specific sectors. There are measures for the health and social infrastructure, both for now and for the future. And of course, there is a series of economic reform measures that have been announced, cutting across the entire swath of sectors, from agriculture to mining to industry to services to infrastructure. And the Reserve Bank of India has also introduced a series of measures that will inject about $110 billion of liquidity into the economy. Switching from that into the tech sector, and I think all of us realize that crisis or moments of great challenge sometimes accelerates the journey and telescopes the future into the present. So all over the world, we are going to see a dramatic increase in digitalization. India has been on a massive digitalization revolution for the past 5 years. We've built the world's biggest public digital infrastructure of 1.2 billion digital identities, 1.2 billion phones, and over 1 billion bank accounts that have enabled us to dramatically change financial inclusion, digitalization of payments, governance and delivery of public services, among other things. Now, in the past month and going forward, I'd say that digitalization and digital technology is serving fundamentally in two different baskets. One is it is serving as an important instrument to achieve public policy goals. And second is the impact in the market. Now, in terms of public policy goals, we've been able to use digital platforms to transfer more than $5 billion US dollars worth of direct benefits to in cash to 160 million beneficiaries in their bank accounts. We have also Reserve Bank of India has taken several measures to make it easier for people to use digital payments, for example, waiving off charges or reducing costs. We've got now working on portability of welfare benefits. For example, by August 2020, 640 million Indians will be able to have a portable ration card which enables them to access subsidized food through the public distribution system anywhere in India. And by the 640 million people in the next 2 months, and by next year it'll cover the entire population that is covered by the public distribution system. And that is because there are so many migrant workers who are unable to at the moment take benefit of that. We have introduced massive new schemes in education and health. For example, we have a scheme called Diksha where 610 million hits have been recorded in the last 1 month. So there are not a large number of public policy initiatives that have benefited immensely. For example, for our 60 million units in small scale sector, we are using digital platforms to refund them money as also give them loans. We have an algorithm-based system whereby loans can be disbursed up to $150,000 within 59 minutes. This got to be less than an hour. So there are different ways in which we're using it for public policy. But on the private sector side, obviously, the overall economic downturn will have an impact on the startup sector anywhere in the world. But I see some very promising signs. In the first quarter of 2020, there was a 40% increase in the funding raised by the fintech sector in India, that raised about $807 million. In fact, in the first quarter, Indian fintech sector raised far more money than the fintech sector in China, almost by a ratio of 2:1. We see Geo Platform, for example, raising about 10 billion plus in the context. And we see a lot of growth in areas like virtual cards, in QR-based payments, in of course, sectors which are catering in some sense to remote applications, from online delivery to ed sector, for example, has registered a 26% growth in just last 1 month. We're talking about a survey of 35 ed tech service providers. So there is a great deal of optimism and confidence in the startup and the fintech sector and the tech sector in India about the immense possibilities that have opened up, both because of the existence of a public digital infrastructure, but also the new opportunities that have arisen from the immediate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing some amazing data points there, and it really helps to frame this trend towards digital and brings that to life. And I think we're going to stay on that thematic around digital acceleration, but we want to kind of move that also towards the cross-border element to this. So a great deal of your roles focus on cross-border trade and business activity, and this plays a crucial role in global growth. And so with this acceleration that, you know, all of you have talked about towards digitalization and how it's impacting every single industry vertical, this has to be front and center in your thinking and your plans for the remainder of the year. And so, as you heard earlier on today, Deputy Prime Minister share an interesting stat around seeing 5 years of digital adoption in just 8 weeks. That really begins to frame the changes, but also the opportunities that are in front of us. And so Niclas, I'd like to open with the question for you around how is this digital trend impacting your cross-border initiatives? And can you share some examples that you're seeing kind of the here and now and ideally tomorrow as well?
Yeah, first of all, I'm happy you asked that question to me, because I was just saying before everybody came on the call here that having listened to that, I think the McKinsey report, I completely don't buy that. I don't think, because a lot can happen in tech in 5 years. So even though I understand the general point, which is that we've taken a sort of a quantum leap with some digital technologies, especially in education and healthcare, you know, a lot can happen in 5 years. But in any case, I'm just saying that to throw it out there as a debating point. On cross-border, I really enjoyed listening to Javed. I think India is a fantastic example of where, in the case of Sweden, you know, there's a near unicorn. We hope it'll be unicorns are called Truecaller, who are working. They expanded from Sweden in a phenomenal way into India. I know that DBS did that with digital banking from Singapore here going into India. And that sort of collaboration is going to be super important when we recover as a globe, and also making sure that we're reaching, as in your case with the population, as many people as possible. In Singapore, I want to mention that we have an initiative called the Nordic Innovation House, which is a soft landing spot intended for the precise purpose of getting startups from the Nordics to come out here, have a look, gain networks, gain contacts, gain understanding, and hopefully scale up in the broader region. Supply chains, I would say, they are completely disrupted, of course, but you should not underestimate that, you know, the staying power of China, for example. But on the other hand, there will be a lot more growth in the Southeast Asia market. So we're hoping to, for sure, capitalize on that. Thank you.
Dorte, I know you've been involved in that Nordic Innovation House too, and you spoke previously about promoting digital business models pre-COVID-19. Can you talk about how your plans have evolved and your thinking has evolved in light of this digital acceleration?
Well, I think a lot of the trends that we saw before COVID-19 are also the trends that we're going to follow and pursue after COVID-19, but some of them have just gained a bit more speed and momentum. And digitalization, however much you think it has already changed, is of course one of those that we look at. So we're looking very much at how we can support businesses with digital solutions. Some are created in partnership between the government and business in order to find ways to, for instance, expose companies to financing opportunities, to present deal stacks in a digital manner, etc., that can solve some of the problem of not having perfect market information when you have to make your decisions. So these are the kind of digital tools that we are trying to work with now. But I would also like to say that it's not just about digital. I mean, digital is important, but if this time has showed us anything, it is that personal relationships, business relationships are also important and will continue to be important. So a lot of what we will do is to continue to try and connect our ecosystems in Denmark to ecosystems here in Singapore and also beyond in the ASEAN region and to India, because that's where we see a lot of the growth and we see a lot of the solutions that come out of Denmark and of the larger Nordic and EU region as very suitable for some of the challenges that are out here. And here I'm thinking specifically about challenges related to the Sustainable Development Goals. This has been one of the key priorities for me in my entire 4 years here in Singapore, to figure out how we can accelerate getting solutions to the Sustainable Development Goal through technology. And there we are really making some headways now. One of the new exciting initiatives that we are working on is a dialogue between our Fintech hub in Copenhagen called Copenhagen Fintech and the UNDP Technology and Innovation for Sustainable Development Center here in Singapore. They're working on creating an accelerator where Nordic, not just Danish, but Nordic startups in the sustainable space can come out here and get an impact assessment of the kind of solution that they have figure out whether it will work here, and get a validation of the idea that also will drive investment into it. We think that could lead a lot of Nordic companies to look more into this region and reduce some of the barriers to coming here. So this could be one of the ways we work to try and get sustainable solutions out here. But also, we want to see solutions from Singapore and from the region come to Denmark and to the Nordics. There is a very natural partnership between Singapore and Denmark in the technology and fintech space. We are both small, very highly digitalized. I think Denmark is the most digital country in Europe, according to the Digital Economy and Society Index. Singapore leads the way with the Smart Nation initiatives here in the ASEAN region. India in itself a giant when it comes to digitalization. So there are a lot of natural ways to work together around this. We also have an openness to change and to digital solutions. And importantly, we have a sound regulatory framework to support these solutions moving forward. We have done a lot of work at the government level, Singapore and Denmark, to support developing a highway of businesses going both ways, from Denmark to the ASEAN market and from the ASEAN markets and to Europe. And in order to support it, we have signed 3 agreements. Some have been between our ecosystems, the Copenhagen Fintech and Singapore Fintech Association, which is doing remarkable work here in Singapore, and also at the government level between our Financial Supervisory Authority and the Monetary Authority of Singapore to allow for sandboxing opportunities and regulatory support. So we have really tried to do what we can from many angles to support this, and now we are starting to see some results. There are a host of Danish companies who already have found either customers or data or funding or partnerships in Singapore and beyond. And we are also seeing Singaporean companies access the accelerator now at Copenhagen Fintech, including a company called Vizard. So we are very, very excited about this, and it's something we will build on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dorte. And you touched upon areas around sustainability, and we'll try and make some time towards the end of the session to get into some of those details there, because I think it's very important. But I'd like to just continue with you, Jawad, and you spoke a great deal about digital developments domestically. How do you see this impacting the way SMEs and even micro SMEs do business? And what are the new cross-border opportunities or initiatives which could help accelerate this change?
Yeah, great question. Let me just make a brief broader point. I think, well, we have heard, my colleagues from 3 countries who are great strategic partners, but also great partners in the digital space and the economic space. So, we're very encouraging to see that we're looking forward to working together as countries as we come out of this crisis. The second point, in a general philosophical sense, is that we are not yet sure as a world whether when we come out of this, we will turn towards each other or turn away from each other or turn on each other. So we hope that the world will turn towards each other rather than on each other or away from each other. But the jury is really out. And so it's important for all of us to focus on the possibilities and the opportunities of cooperating and sustaining cross-border engagement across all areas. Because human behavior can sometimes be extremely resistant to change, and we might lapse back into old habits. So it's important to build on what we already have done and try and intensify that. So with India and Singapore, and India and ASEAN, digital cooperation has been perhaps the most important and exciting area of engagement over the past 3 years that I've been here. It's been very rewarding, and we've made great progress. Let me just list out a few initiatives, because it'll be very important for those who are listening in from ASEAN and Singapore in particular. One, that we have made a lot of progress in making our payment systems interoperable. As a starting point, we have launched India's payment card RuPay, and we have just completed the launch of Bheem QR, a QR payment based in Singapore. Incidentally, that's the first place globally where we have launched these 2 products. Similarly, Nets payment cards are going to be launched in India very soon. We are working on a very important platform, which is Business Sans Border. And this is a platform or a hub or an engine, I think, pioneered by IMDA and MAS, which will act as an engine that brings together different SME and MSME platforms together. This will enables medium and small and medium enterprises in India and elsewhere to connect with each other. And therefore open up vast new opportunities in terms of markets and suppliers. And it'll also provide a full range of services from logistics to finance. So if you have a hit on a supply, you can also get options on logistic suppliers as well as financing options. So this platform, for example, in India, we are already in the process of onboarding Confederation of All India Traders, which has 70 million members, as the Trade Promotion Council of India, which has thousands of members. And we're working towards getting other platforms, for example, GM, there's Government e-Marketplace, which already has 4.4 million members on it, onto this platform, so that not only can they connect themselves internally in India, but also connect with the rest of the world. So this is going to be one great way in which the horizons of MSME sector, micro, small, and medium enterprise sector, can expand exponentially. We're also working on building something together, which is going to be very important, which is called Global Stack. Now, as you know, India Stack is the largest set of API in this world. And this India Stack is what has led to this digital revolution. So working with Singapore, we are trying to create a global stack that will enable us to offer solutions on financial inclusion, digitalization of payments, delivery of public services through digital platforms, as we've done in India in a cost-effective manner in ASEAN and in other parts of the world. We are also, incidentally, Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched in November 2018, if you recall, at the Singapore Fintech Festival, where he delivered the keynote address, the Apex platform, which is again a platform which MAS has helped craft together with the ASEAN Bankers Association. And Apex is a platform which brings together the fintech companies and financial institutions, banks, for example. And in a world where it has been very difficult for fintech companies to be able to reach potential clients beyond their borders, this has been a great platform. So as I think the last when we checked, there were 200 fintech companies on the Apex platform, of which about 80 were from India. But this covers, and there were about, I think, 57 or 60 banks which had come on board. So this is, again, a great initiative. We're working to make the our payment platforms, Unified Payment Interface of India, which is a seamless and probably the largest single payment, digital payment platform with Singapore's FAST. And then we're also working together in SupTech and the RegTech aspects between Reserve Bank of India and the Monetary Authority of Singapore. We've created a number of platforms, and I think it's important to recognize that these offer opportunities not just for Singapore, but for ASEAN countries. Members, we have the Singapore Fintech Festival, of course. The High Commission of India created this platform called Inspreneur, India-Singapore Entrepreneurship Bridge, where we've had 3 editions where we have pretty large seminars and workshops, but also bring together hundreds of startups from India and this region to connect with each other and to connect with funding opportunities, with accelerators and incubators, with mentors. So this is, again, a platform that has worked extremely well. We have, of course, Singapore's Global Innovation Alliance in India, and we have Enterprise Singapore, MAS, and in India, Startup India and Stand Up and Invest India, which are working together along with Atal Innovation Mission in India. We have India and Singapore have created the joint working group on fintech, which is the first that either of us have with any country. And we've started India-Singapore Hackathon, which is now going to be expanded into India-Singapore/ASEAN Hackathon. For Indian startups, Singapore is an important gateway to ASEAN and to the rest of the world. A large number of them seek financing and financing options over here, so that's a very important area. India is a country of enormous scale, so we are working with Singapore to enable Singapore and ASEAN-based startups to get into Indian market, just as we think a 650 million strong ASEAN market is a very important opportunity for Indian startups. And there are a number of cases that have come up, and I've seen some of the most fascinating examples after COVID, including one which is Indian startup based in Singapore, getting engineered in Bangalore and offering health solutions for COVID in Singapore, ASEAN, and around the world. We've also, in India, set up a $1 billion fund with ASEAN Secretariat for improving digital connectivity between the two countries. So there are, this is just a slightly abridged list because I know we're running out of time, but that just gives you an idea about the opportunities that exist and the kind of initiatives and platforms that we have created to foster greater cooperation between India and Singapore and India and ASEAN through Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Cara, bonus point for you for answering live some of the questions that are coming in. We have an insane number of questions, over 40 questions from the audience. So any we don't get a chance to address today, we'll try to get answers for you after the session and we'll share that with everyone that's dialed in. But Cara, as the UK begins to open up from lockdown, how is the government approaching cross-border collaborations and specifically what are the collaborations you're seeing between the UK and the ASEAN region?
Yeah, thank you very much. So in a sense, this is very much a kind of continuation of what we've been focusing already. I mean, the UK has such a strong kind of financial and tech sector. The amount of capital that is raised for the tech sector, specifically for fintech in the UK, is really, really high and rose 40% last year at $4.9 billion. We've got a really high fintech adoption rate as well in the UK. It's 71%, which is higher than the average and double that of some countries in our region. And we also have massive amounts of talent. So I think in terms of the way that we are supporting the sectors in collaborating with each other across borders, we have a big kind of market access barrier consideration. So we have really excellent dialogues, not only in Singapore with the likes of MAS, but also with other regulators around the region, so that we can translate what the sector tells us is a challenge to stop them entering a market and try and work through those together. In Singapore, that dialogue is extremely strong. We have a fintech bridge where our ambition is to make sure that companies can translate their business model across borders as easily as possible. I think the dialogue that companies have here with the regulator in Singapore around their own regulation is really, really impressive. It is very business sensitive and very responsive. And we like to make sure that the issues that are developing here are properly shared back with the UK as well, so that UK regulators can consider about that. We also have strong sandboxes, and I think there is a high level of trust in the UK sandbox, which was one of the first to get off the ground, where we've had over 700 companies that have come through that. And the reputation of the UK sandbox is also a massive help to companies when they start exporting. But I think it's really true to say that while the tech sector is really strong, there are some things that are impacting on it. So while we're still continuing to do pitching. So we did a pitching last week where we had EDB and major Singapore corporates who were listening to pitches from tens of UK companies who were trying to respond to those Singapore companies' problem statements in the tech area and present their solutions up front. That's really great. And what's really interesting is that the demand for those kind of things hasn't gone down. In fact, it's gone up, whereas we would have had before kind of individuals moving country to make sure that they can pitch their products. We're now enabled to do it virtually. Sorry, I've got a bit of interruption behind me. But the take-up for those kind of things is really, really strong. I'm really conscious, however, that as Dorte was saying, businesses are built on relationships. And for the moment, we don't have quite as much cross-border movement. We're hoping to get back as soon as we possibly can in business movement terms. But in that meantime, I think governments, we are trying to support our international trade programs are trying to very much support those businesses that want to find collaborators in each of these countries. We have a really strong and integrated network of trade support officers that exist right across Asia, and we have the habit of red carpeting people, is what we like to talk about it. So if you've seen a really interesting, innovative fintech company in one of the markets, we can very much pass on their details and their offer to our colleagues across in other embassies and high commissions across the region, so that when we're trying to give them more trade support, there is already a high level of understanding of what the government, what the company is offering within market. Yeah, I think those are the main issues I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Cara. And I can't believe where the time's gone. There's literally 13 minutes left. I think, Joad, you did say that we were quite ambitious in the number of topics we wanted to cover, and there's 42 questions already. But I want to switch gears quickly. And this question is to you, Nick, around, especially as a former banker. What will financial services look like post-COVID-19, and is there any specific advice you can give to fintechs as well that are looking to capture some of the opportunities? And if we could try and keep some of the answers as brief as possible, we can get through more questions together.
Sorry, I was just desperately trying to get out of the Q&A that I had up there, so I wasn't fully prepared. But so just you were saying one more time. The question was on financial services and.
Yeah, so as a former banker, it'd be good to see your views on the future of financial services in a post-COVID-19 world, and if there's any specific advice you can give to fintech startups as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I think first of all, there's the first part, which is the obvious one, that this crisis has shown that the imperative of going digital all the way. In other words, I think this really exposes that anyone who is doing any part of the chain that could be done digitally in a non-digital way will be exposed. So that will be one thing. I think that this also shows that identification, verification, and control, that goes back to a theme which I think is, if you go into the financial sector now, transparency is absolutely key. Sweden is a very transparency-focused country, but whether it's blockchain related, that you can follow a transaction, whether it's identification, as Jawed was describing, your digital identity and so on, the transparency will be key. So I think that will also, and I think Sweden pioneered a lot of those apps, the bank ID, Swish, public key infrastructure and so on. By the way, that will also go for the Internet of Things, because two items can be a security issue, how they identify. So I would say those areas will be important to focus on. And as I said, I think initially feedback that we got from our fintech industry is that, so far, the digital has penetrated a number of the everyday finance needs, but there are still large chunks that have still yet to be fully digitized, like mortgages, pensions, and so on. So that's how I see it. I think 5G also comes in here, that things will be faster and you will be able to reach more people more efficiently and quickly, as again the India example shows.
Dorte, you mentioned earlier about your views and your focus on green finance or sustainable finance. And I think we saw in the last year a big focus on this globally. It was covered very heavily at the World Economic Forum, and Singapore Fintech Festival focused it heavily in November 2019. And how do we ensure that this continues to permeate the world as we go forward? How do we ensure that it stays top of the agenda, sustainable finance and green finance?
Well, I think that momentum is there now, and it has to stay top of mind, because sometimes there's just a marriage of necessity and opportunity, and that's what we see in sustainable finance. We need those solutions to solve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but it's also an immense business opportunities for the companies involved, so there is a natural drive towards those solutions. In Denmark, the government has set down 13 climate partnerships, but they also look more widely at sustainability than just climate. And one of them is set up for sustainable finance. And some of the areas that they have identified as the ones that will probably see most traction as we go into the next couple of years is ESG screening. I mean, ESG is going to be very, very hot. Sustainable investments, sustainable personal finance, financial inclusion will also be very, very important. And how you make sure that the AI solutions that come out are ethical. Remittances will be a big thing, financial literacy solutions, and of course, more broadly, green finance, like the great and innovative green finance bonds that are coming out of Singapore now. So no doubt there will be a lot of traction on this agenda, because there is just both a momentum and an imperative to do that. Just this week, the Danish government has announced that they are planning to implement the largest two new energy islands in the world, where they're going to build more than twice the wind capacity we already have. And today already Denmark can be fully covered by wind energy on a windy day. But we will more than to have twice as much capacity as we have now before 2030 to reach our goal of becoming fossil fuel free in 2050 and reducing by 70% already in 2030 our CO2 emissions. So that is a massive task and requires a new kind of industry commitments. And the reason why I mention this is because already the next day, all the pension funds in Denmark who have a large fortune under management came out and said they are invested in this. They want to be part of this journey. And the investors, all the private investors in Denmark, are also seeking ways to direct their pension investments towards sustainable areas. So I think this goes without saying, there are massive opportunities here, and those who are timely will catch those birds.
Thank you, Dorte. Jared, representing here such a large country with such high priorities that you've just discussed around response to COVID-19, how do you reflect on what Dorte's explained there about focusing on sustainability and green finance?
Well, thank you. I think, first of all, I have here three colleagues from countries that have made enormous progress in green financing, sustainable financing, very innovative solutions as well. In India also, we are now attached a great deal of priority to this, because we've set ourselves very ambitious targets. For example, not just, we want to go beyond our commitments in the Paris Accord. We've, for example, set ourselves a target of 175 gigawatts of renewable energy in 2022. We're likely to exceed that and reach 225 gigawatts, and therefore we are revising our targets in the future as well. This is just one aspect, but there are, in broader sense, given the climate challenges that we're all facing, I think, and the societal pressures that exist now, especially from the millennials who are clearly far more committed to sustainability, I think there is a great deal of opportunity and responsibility as well. So first, of course, there has to be a proper framework for it. And I think Fintech offers a number of solutions that will address some of the challenges that we face in green financing. For example, in identification, in evaluation, we can use big data and artificial intelligence to do that. We can use Fintech for better monitoring, audit, and compliance. And so corporate reporting consistency with their stated objectives can certainly be improved. And real time or on a very frequent basis, the investors will have a clear picture. Traceability becomes easier. Of course, it is a platform also in which a large number of companies can actually use crowdsourcing and tap non-institutional finances for sustainable projects. I think there'll be a huge market for it. And we are beginning to see that in India about some of the most successful fintech companies are not necessarily only in the payment space, but they are in the space of raising resources for small businesses, for medium enterprises, and even for sustainable projects. And so this is a full gamut of possibilities that have opened up as a result of fintech in addressing the challenges that regulators face in really making a strong case market for green financing. But more broadly is, the question of financial services. I think each country and each government and central bank will have to do what they have to do to address the financial consequences of the economic and the health crisis that we are all facing. But at an international level also, governments as well as central bankers will have to really pull together to coordinate their responses, monetary as well as fiscal responses, but also work to deal with some of the tendencies that might arise with respect to reversing the general trend towards openness and trade and investment flows. Because we've faced pandemics and wars before, and we've recovered from them only because the world has always come together and to achieve a set of common goals. And I think this crisis is again an opportunity for us to foster a much greater degree of cooperation, both in terms of responding to the current health crisis, but also in terms of a more inclusive and kinder world in which we also take care of our planet. And the best way to do it is, of course, in terms of sustainability, is to not compromise on growth necessarily or economic development, but find ways in which we can use fintech and technology to be better able to channelize funds into more sustainable projects. Thank you.
That's a beautiful sentiment, Jawed. And sadly, we've come to the end of our Green Shoots episode, but we have time for one more question. And essentially, every episode we finish off with a Green Shoot story. So something that you've seen or read in the last few days or the past week, something that's inspiring or that has really moved you. And so, you know, it can be something in your personal life or something in your professional life. And this is going to be a quick fire session because we have 2 minutes left. So I'd like to start off with Dorte, please.
Well, if you'll allow me, then I'll use my time instead to say, please get in touch. I feel terrible that we didn't have a chance to answer very many of your questions, but we are still here. So just write to us at the Danish Embassy, give us a call, and then we'll be happy to answer any further questions that you have. We'd love to see more cooperation grow between Singapore, ASEAN, India, and the European markets.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And Niclas, I'd like to ask you the same question.
Yeah, I tried to answer a couple of questions, but I sort of gave up. I wish I could, but I agree with Dorte that come see us and come see the Nordic Innovation House in Singapore as well, I say to all the entrepreneurs and startups out there. Green shoot moment, I would say, since Kara is on here, I think what the Swedish, English AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals MNC is doing together with Oxford University, happens to be alma mater of mine on the vaccine, seems very, very encouraging. And I also wanted to say that the crisis has brought out a lot of the investors in the fintech area. One of the Klarna founders, for example, in Sweden has something called the Nordic Foundation, and they have been one of the earliest actors to come out with COVID efforts. And I think impact investing and green investments will be a huge theme in the years ahead. So thanks.
That's great to hear. And Kara, can you share your special green shoot story?
So I think one of the things that I found most inspiring in the last few years is actually how the financial system has really started to lean into the sustainability agenda. And so here in Singapore, one of the privileges that I've got as being a British High Commissioner is the number of conversations I have with financial institutions who are really thinking deeply about how they can play in the sustainability space. And of course, they're doing it because they think it makes sense in the long run financially, but they're also doing it, say, if you talk about Temasek, for example, where they are looking to now not make new investments until they can prove to themselves that it's going to contribute in some positive way to achievement of one of the sustainable development goals. The work that Singapore is doing with Imperial University to look at how you can properly measure and gauge the climate risk and the climate impacting performance of any investments that you're going to make. I think the financial system can be absolutely decisive in this area because what gets funded gets done. So the fact that we are seeing within Singapore a massive attention on green finance and upskilling the professionals that work here to act in a really responsible and constructive way is something that gives me real hope for the future.
It's great to have a sustainability theme on the final Green Shoot stories, and there's one person left, so Jawed, please share your moment that's moved you over the past week.
Okay, so this is somebody who I met and I just briefly mentioned it. It's a young Indian startup based in Singapore, which has made this Fitbit-like device which has the software platform built in India, and the device was manufactured in China, sells for $18. I think he got an order from Ministry of Health and Ministry of Manpower within 36 hours and was told to produce 50,000 of these in 10 days. He was able to do that. And that device measures a heart rate, temperature, SpO2, and fatigue levels using, again, big data and artificial intelligence. And this is synced into yourself, into your smartphone, and then into a central health monitoring system. So it can be used by healthcare frontline workers. It can be used by, for example, people who are infected but are not really serious, so it can be monitored. And it's being used in hospitals also in the United States. And we are exploring both manufacturing it and using it in India. So it was a very fascinating story because he's a very young chap and was able to pull this together in a very short span of time. The other person also we've dealt with is, again, a company supported by EDB, as the previous one was, which was really a unicorn, a platform that was dealing with fashion, and has now switched completely to become a great aggregator and supplier of medical equipment and PPE kits, etc. Again, the nimbleness and the flexibility with which they were able to make that shift. Again, very young people, gives us great confidence about the future when we meet them, gives us ideas. And we're always find that at the heart of this is a great support that Singapore is providing many of them, both in terms of their investment and in response. And before I conclude, I'd like to thank MAS, of course, for putting this together. It's been a fascinating session. I learned a great deal from my colleagues. So thank you, Karen, Nick, and Dorte. And very reassured about the direction in which our countries, which I hear from you, are moving in dealing with the current crisis and how we wish to look at the world in the future. So thank you for joining us today.
Great stories, great examples there, Jared. Can you share the names of those two organizations you just mentioned in case people want to look up?
One is Kaha Health Solutions, and the other one was Zilingo.
Great, Zilingo and Kaha Health. So we'll send those around afterwards, as well as answers to some of these more questions that are coming in.
We're working with in the last week or 10 days.
Brilliant. Okay. And again, thank you very much to our distinguished speakers and for our audience for your amazing questions that are coming in. We'll try and get through as many of those in response and send them around to you afterwards. So thank you very much, everyone. As we close this session, you'll see a QR code pop up on your screen. We're running a quick survey to see how COVID has been affecting you. This is for IMDA, so another government entity in Singapore. If you don't mind completing that, please do. And then you will see a final screen pop up with more details about our next Green Shoot session, which is taking place on Thursday, as well as a link to join our WhatsApp or Telegram groups and tell us the topics you want to hear about for our next sessions. So thank you again, everyone. Enjoy your day.